My name is Moen Campbell. As you can see, after a car accident, I traveled from the real world to the world of light novel. When I feel pain from being stabbed by a knife, many memories flood into my mind. I turned out to be the yellow-haired villain in the novel. When I was still feeling lost because I was the villain, a purple book fell from the sky. Is this some mysterious prop? The weather today is quite sunny, with sunlight shining on Duke Campbell's castle. The clear sky and mountains set off the castle in a magnificent and towering manner. In one of the very luxurious rooms of the castle, a blond young man had just woken up and sat up from bed. He opened his own bleary eyes, topped off with a messy head of hair, and looked at his surroundings with a bewildered expression. If I remember correctly, didn't I die in a car accident? Did I? He looked at his hands in confusion and muttered to himself. Did I transmigrate? He lifted his head and observed the layout of the room. The design of the room is a luxurious palace decoration. There are some books, a dagger, and a mirror placed on the table. He noticed that the table, chairs, and other furniture in front of him seemed somewhat special. Palace-style decoration and furniture, Western style. He saw his current appearance in the mirror on the table. In the mirror, his long blonde hair was scattered, and he possessed the face of a beautiful boy who could charm thousands of girls. He touched his face and murmured to himself. There's also this face that looks almost exactly the same as when I was 17 or 18 years old. He couldn't figure out where he was exactly. He grabbed his hair frantically with both hands, with a frightened expression on his face. Where did this transmigrate me to? Suddenly, he seemed to realize something. He got out of bed and walked to the desk. He propped up the seat with one hand and placed the other on his chin, repeatedly looking at himself in the mirror on the desk in front of him. Take another look. Hey, I was really handsome when I was young. To be honest, the appearance is quite well restored. This should be a world like games. At this moment, he suddenly froze and his eyes became serious. Wait! He held his chin with one hand and looked up, carefully considering the current situation. Being transmigrated into an alien world because I was hit by a truck. Isn't this just a fantasy in my mind as a middle-aged homebody before I die? He stood in front of the table and picked up the red dagger on the table. He stared at the dagger while thinking about how to confirm his current situation. This needs to be confirmed. Only the sound of a knife cutting through the skin was heard, followed by a line of blood flying out. The sunlight from the window shone right through, illuminating the line of blood even more clearly. He just cut his finger with a knife. The blood and fingers instantly spurted out. He held a knife in one hand and looked expressionlessly at the blood flying out of his fingers. I merely made a shallow cut on my finger. This knife. It's too sharp. It hurts so much. It's true. I have truly transmigrated another world. After feeling the real pain, he covered his hands and rolled back and forth on the bed in pain, occasionally licking the blood that flew out with his mouth. Suddenly, he felt his soul trembling. He who was rolling around instantly froze in place. It was as if something was pouring into his brain. In his memory, he was wearing tattered clothes and leaning against the wall, while the girl walking past in front of him was the protagonist of this world. A strange voice suddenly sounded. Moen Campbell blasphemed the royal family, stripped him of his noble status, and demoted him to commoners. His crime is unforgivable, and he is sentenced to exile. The scene changed, and he became a beggar on the street. He was disheveled and wearing his tattered clothes. He leaned helplessly against the dirty wall, surrounded by scattered bottles of wine and garbage. He even lost one hand and one leg, looking very down and out. Moen Campbell shall never enter the territory of the Empire. Violators will be killed without mercy. After these memories were played back in his mind, he felt his mind go groggy. There is too much information for him to accept all at once. He leaned against the bed, tilted his head back, and kept panting heavily. He covered his head with his hand and muttered to himself, "Huh. I can't believe it." At first, I thought the name was just a coincidence, but I didn't expect. After slowing down from the uncomfortable feeling, his expression became grave and his eyes looked straight ahead. He suddenly recalled the name and backstory of the original owner of this current body, and couldn't help but sigh. I actually reincarnate into this guy's body. That retarded, brain-dead dude. The yellow-haired villain who wasn't even an elite monster. The name of this person popped into his mind. That's right. He was reincarnated into this villain named Moen Campbell. Moen recalled his past life. He remembered the light novel he would stay up late every night, with heavy dark circles under his eyes, huddled in bed reading light novels on his mobile phone. The Strongest and Most Gifted Girl in History is the most popular light novel of the year in the world before I was reborn, and also one of the few works I read every day. The book roughly tells the story of the protagonist, who is the illegitimate daughter of a fallen aristocrat, upgrading and killing various enemies along the way, and rising to become a great hero who saves the world. The person sitting in the chair now, with a very provocative expression, is the villain of this novel, Moen Campbell. Moen Campbell is a brainless, yellow-haired villain in the early part of the book. He used his family power to oppress the protagonist, constantly sending people to murder the female lead and help the protagonist team upgrade. In the end, his plot shattered, and he even involved his own parents, ending up with a broken family. If I remember correctly, there is no plot about him in this book after more than 20 chapters. Moen recalled all the bad things he had done and his tragic ending, and couldn't help but feel deeply affected. He buried his head in his knees and covered his head with both hands. Such a person doesn't want to be a good young master, but has to be a fool who gets in the way of the protagonist. That's me. Moen felt especially helpless when he realized that he had been reborn as the villain that everyone in this world was crying out for. He held his head and had a look of wanting to cry on his face. I thought that I would be reborn once to become a protagonist and have a good time. As a result, I was reincarnated into this fool who was destined to become a stepping stone. What can I do? It's over now. While Moen was still in a state of anxiety over the fact that he was the villain, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. A maid knocked on the door of his room. Noticing that someone was about to enter the room, Moen hurriedly wiped the tears on his face with his sleeve so as not to let others notice his current appearance. After adjusting his emotions, he spoke towards the door. "Come in." The door to the room was opened, and a very pretty maid came in with a small suitcase and a graceful step. She is the maid of Duke Campbell's mansion. Her name is Anne, and stood in front of Moen and greeted him first. Young master. When Anne first came in, Moen didn't think of her name for a moment. He stammered out the name of the person that happened to pop into his head. "Oh, you're Anne. What's up?" And held up the small box in his hand and showed it to him. "Young master's formal attire for tomorrow's banquet has been delivered. Madam asks me to bring it to you for a try." Moen sat on the bed, scratching his head and awkwardly replying to Anne's words. He doesn't want others to know that the current Moen is no longer the same as before. "Okay, I know. Put it over there." At this moment, Anne frowned slightly. She stared at Moen as if sensing something unusual about him. She leaned down slightly and noticed bloodstains on Moon's fingers. She asked him softly, "Young master, are you injured?" Moen lifted his hand and looked at it, only to find that his fingers were still bleeding. He smiled lightly and replied to Anne's question. "Yes, I accidentally broke my skin just now. It's okay. Do you have any medication to stop the bleeding or a band-aid?" Band-aid? Apparently, Anne didn't know what exactly was the band-aid that Moen was talking about. There didn't seem to be such a thing in this world. Anne knelt on one knee in front of Moen and pulled his injured hand, as if preparing to do something. Anne doesn't know what the young master is saying, but if it's just about stopping bleeding, I can still do it. Moen looked at her with some confusion. He thought Anne was going to use healing magic to stop his bleeding. "Oh, Anne, you know how to treat." However, in the next moment, Anne held Moon's hand with both hands and gently licked his injured finger with his tongue. She made this gesture expressionlessly, as if she didn't find it strange. However, Moen may not be the same. After being licked by Anne like this, he felt very surprised. Moen can intuitively feel the touch of Anne's tongue. He froze on the spot, his face instantly turned red like an apple. He hadn't expected her method of stopping the bleeding to be in such a way. After licking it several times in a row, the bleeding had slightly stopped. Anne's mouth opened slightly, leaving Moon's fingers. His fingers were left with a small amount of her saliva. The bleeding has stopped. Every drop of the young master's blood is very precious. Please do not easily injure yourself. And gently wiped his mouth and offered a kind reminder to Moen. Her cheeks also blushed slightly, as if the previous action had made her a little excited. Moen had a reddened face and eyes wide open, still not having eased up from what he'd just been through. He stammered and replied to Anne, Okay, I'll remember." And stood up, turned around, and prepared to leave Moon's room. She calmly said to Moen, "If young master has no other needs, I will go out to work first." Moen nodded stiffly. Thank you. Sorry to have worried you." When Anne left the room and heard her footsteps gradually fading away, Moen finally couldn't help it. The blush on his cheeks has not yet faded. He tightly held his hands and was about to lose control of his emotions. Suddenly, he held his face in both hands and felt very excited. "Oh my God, she is too cute." He excitedly rolled on the bed, while recalling what Anne had done to him just now. He has never received such treatment before. Black-haired and gentle maid sister, just now she's so cute. While Moon was still excited about what had just happened in the room, and outside the door did not notice the sound in the room. As she walked, she was still thinking about how Moon had just made her feel a little off. This seems quite different from the usual Moon. Young master. She frowned slightly, doubting Moon and his behavior just now. Did he just say thank you to me? Moon, who was rolling back and forth on the bed, felt a little tired at this moment. He lay flat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, recalling the plot of his story in this novel. He didn't understand why Moon Campbell, whose family background was so good, still had to provoke the protagonist. The son of a duke, with high status, handsome appearance, a family that is not short of money, and a maid sister to take care of him. Why does he have to provoke the protagonist? If I remember the plot correctly, it seems that the Duke's mansion was raided because he drugged the princess during his coming-of-age ceremony. It was as if Moon had thought of a way to avoid going towards the destruction of his family. He sat up from the bed with a confident smile on his face. Since I know the problem, it's easy to handle. As long as I try not to provoke that protagonist, and don't do anything stupid at the coming-of-age ceremony. I, Moon, still have a chance to change my destiny against all odds. Moon held his chin with one hand, pondering how he should continue to live in this world in the future. In order to still be a wealthy playboy in the future, I need to plan carefully and carefully. Speaking of which, when was the coming-of-age ceremony? Suddenly, he remembered that Anne had just brought his coming-of-age gown to his room, and seemed to have mentioned the time of the coming-of-age ceremony. Anne just gave me the formal dress for the coming-of-age ceremony. Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Knowing that the coming-of-age ceremony would be held tomorrow, Moon was completely stunned. He didn't expect to face his own ending so soon. He couldn't help but howl loudly in his room. Damn it! He crumbled onto his bed, hugging his thighs and weeping silently. System, are you there? The old man? Goddess? Cupid? Moon shouted out these names one by one, trying to be able to summon someone to help him with the difficulty at hand. However, unfortunately, no one appeared in front of him out of thin air. He cried in despair while muttering to himself. Anyone? Can anyone hear me? Does Elle really not have any cheat abilities? It's not like Elle only got a 10 pull with 5 golds in my last life. Even if it was a lucky draw, it should not be like this. Right? Knowing that the course of events had been irrevocably changed, Moon sighed in resignation. Tomorrow is the coming-of-age ceremony. It's already too late. I don't know if apologizing to the protagonist in person tomorrow can solve the problem. She probably wouldn't make any excessive demands, such as publicly licking her feet to forgive her. In Moon's fantasy, he was fiercely stepped on by a long leg, wearing black stockings, and was unable to move. Moon, you can do it. A true man is born to face the world, able to endure pain and overcome difficulties. An insult like licking feet is nothing compared to having my family broken up. I just need to bear this humiliation alone. Of course, it would be even better if she could wear black stockings tomorrow. Moon, who had decided on a solution, clapped his hands, smiled, and comforted himself. It's decided. As soon as I meet with the protagonist tomorrow, I'll rush up and slide on my knees at light speed and kowtow 3 more times. At this time, what Moen didn't know was that a mysterious portal quietly appeared from behind him. Immediately afterwards, something seemed to fall from the portal and hit his head. He shouted in pain. He covered his head while angrily turning back, wanting to see what hit him. What exactly is it? It hurts so much. Is this going to smash my head through? He fixed his eyes on his bed, and a book with a purple cover suddenly appeared out of nowhere. There was also a strange pattern on the cover of the book. This is... Moen walked towards the bed and reached out a trembling hand to pick up the book. Could it be? Could it be? He was elated, feeling like it was what he had hoped would come to him. My cheat ability has arrived,